Hi, and welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today, my guest is Stanislav Grof, godfather of psychedelic psychotherapy, one of the founders of the field of transpersonal psychology, and a renowned researcher into the use of non-ordinary states of consciousness to gain insight into the human psyche. It was truly an honor to speak with Stanislav Grof, longtime leader at the Esalen Institute, and ask him how he helped shape the culture here through his popular workshops and his month-long programs. In our interview, we talked about his relationship with Michael Murphy and how he came to be invited to live in Big Sur and to teach at Esalen during the 1970s, how he created the practice of holotropic breathwork at the Esalen Institute out of necessity, his collaborations with Fritjof Capra, Gregory Bateson, Rupert Sheldrake, and more. So with no further ado, here's my conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Stanislav Grof. I wonder if we could start off by you telling me the circumstances that brought you to the Esalen Institute.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was involved in basically the last surviving psychedelic research program, which was at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, around 1972 to 73. It became more and more difficult to get the permission, to get the money. And I had, a lot of material already from Prague, but also from Maryland. So I decided to take a year off. I also got married to Joan Halifax. She was an anthropologist from Miami. And she couldn't get a really decent job, appropriate to her education in Baltimore. So I decided to take a year off and write a couple of books. I got within a very short time offers from publishers because we were the last official psychedelic research program, and this was the time when LSD was making headlines. Everybody was interested in it, so they approached me if I would write a book or two. And so I got a contract with Viking Press. I had money for a year. And I went to a party in New York City, the Schwartzes. Bob Schwartz was also somebody who was very much around Esalen. And Michael Murphy was at the party, and he said, "So what are you doing these days, Stan?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm going to write a book." And Michael said, "Why don't you come to Esalen? Esalen is a beautiful place to write a book." I said, "We'll give you some accommodation, and you can do some workshops for us, and we're going to be a trade-off." So he came here in 1973, Joan and I, and this house on Buck Creek was available because Ida Rolf moved out. So we had this, beautiful house on the ocean, and this incredible deal with Esalen, trading the room and board for workshops.
I know you had been involved with Abraham Maslow because you had been involved with the founding of transpersonal psychology, but had you ever been to Esalen before, or was this a concept that was introduced to you by Michael?
No, actually I was at Esalen the first time in 1965. I was on a study journey here for several months. And I didn't have any money. But I had addresses of people where I could go. It was Theo and Ruth Lids, who were in New Haven, who were doing research with schizophrenic families. And then I had spent some time with Virginia Satir at the conference in London. And I had an invitation from her, and then also Betty Eisner from Los Angeles, so I could, go. And so I had ways of staying in different places and just see United States. And when I was staying with Virginia Satir, I always took a bus, to San Francisco and did some sightseeing, and then came back for the night to Palo Alto. That time everything was very cheap. At a point, Virginia Satir said, "You'll be here alone for the weekend because I'm going south." And of course, I was very curious to see new places. She said, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Well, this is this place called Esalen." And so I said, "Can I go with you?" And she said, "Sure." And we arrived here, late at night, and she had Michael's room in the big house, but there was no, accommodation for me. So she said, "You can come and sleep in my room." So there was a king-size bed. And so then Michael Murphy walked into the room in the morning and saw me in bed with Virginia Satir. And we really hit it off, Michael and I. He was at that time very interested in Eastern Europe, what was happening in both Russia, but also the other Eastern European countries. So we had great discussions, and he took me. We went to see Point 16 at that time was for sale. So we drove up and down the coast, and so I had this connection with Michael. And then when I came in 1967, when I came to the States, because I was working in Maryland, at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, I was taking quite a few weekends and come here and do workshops at Esalen.
I'm really curious about those workshops that you taught, because I know later when you came in the 1970s, you were able to develop the field of holotropic breathwork, which I want to get into later. But the initial workshops that you taught in the 1960s, what was the content of that?
Well, I was just talking about the research that I have done in Prague. The kind of image of the psyche that emerged out of it. I had the concept of what I call the coexistems, those kind of memory constellations, and also the perinatal matrices. So this was basically theoretical talk, no experiential part. And Paul Herbert was here. He was a kind of a chronicler. He was going to all these workshops and recording it for Dolphin tapes. And when he saw that, he said, what you're talking about, Stan, is just like what Abe Maslow talks about. And the two of you could really get together. And so he gave me Abe Maslow's address. And at that point, I had a book about this thick, that never got published, but then became about 5 books later. It was called Agony and Ecstasy in Psychiatric Treatment. And I sent it to Abe, and I got this very enthusiastic letter. He wanted me to come and see him in Boston. And so I flew to Boston and came to his house and rang the bell, and his wife Bertha showed up in the door. And I had this very strong feeling of not being welcome. So she was almost like blocking the door with her body, I said, what's happening here? We've never met before. And then she finally, reluctantly, let me in the house. And Abe was lying on the second floor there, recovering from a pretty heavy heart attack. And we had a beautiful time. We talked for hours and basically looking at the parallels. His peak experiences, his research with spontaneous mystical experiences. And I was talking about and writing about mystical experiences induced by psychedelics. And he was very excited about the parallels. And so then after we finished talking, there was a dinner in the kitchen, and then Bertha finally told me what the problem was, that when Abe got that manuscript from me and was reading it, he was getting so excited that she was afraid that when we get together, he's going to be too much for him and he might have another heart attack. So she was basically protecting him. Abe at that time got scholarship, I think it was McLaughlin Foundation, if I remember correctly, in Palo Alto. So he could move from New England to Palo Alto. They gave him a house with a swimming pool, and he could just think and write. And so he, at that point, together with Tony Sutic, they were thinking about creating a discipline of psychology that was go beyond humanistic psychology. In the 50s, they created this humanistic psychology, which was a correction over behaviorism and Freudian psychoanalysis, which became extremely successful, very popular, both for professionals and also lay people. They were very exciting conferences. But within the first 10 years of the existence of humanistic psychology, they themselves became dissatisfied because they left out spirituality, they left out mysticism, even sort of creativity, higher creativity. And so they felt they had to create a new discipline that would include this. And they wanted to call it transhumanistic. And Abe invited me to be part of these small meetings. So there were 2 of them, Abe Maslow, Tony Sutic, and there was Jim Fadiman also, Miles Wick, and Sonia Margulies. So they're very small groups. And we were getting together and kind of brainstorming, what this new discipline would look like. We wanted it to include some of the domains that they left out, but also include the material from psychedelic research. And so we finally got together a system that we felt very comfortable with. It was something that incorporated these observations from consciousness research, but also incorporated spirituality, did make psychotics out of every founder of religion and apostle and shamans and so on, treated sort of with respect the ritual, spiritual history of humanity. But we had this major problem because there was no way we could somehow reconcile what we saw as viable psychology with what we knew as science, which was basically materialistic science. And so that's a whole other kind of part of the history. For me, the major breakthrough was meeting Fritjof Capra after he wrote The Tao of Physics, and showing that basically we were trying to reconcile the new psychology with what he called the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm, monistic materialistic science and so on. And he was talking about the fact that physicists themselves are far beyond this Newtonian Cartesian paradigm with the quantum relativistic physics. And Fritjof and I became friends, and we traveled together, and we were doing workshops which were called Journeys Beyond Space and Time, where Fritjof would take the morning and talk about what physicists discovered about in relation to matter. When lunch came, people's minds were totally blown because Fritjof was showing that science, the physics showed that if you study the matter to the subatomic level, that what we could call stuff ceases to exist. They are just probabilistic equations, and you cannot even say whether a certain particle is there or not. There's certain tendencies to exist, and so on. There was the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. There was a singularity, dimensionless point, and that exploded. Out of it came like time and space, and all the matter that now creates like billions of galaxies and so on. And he talked about black holes and white holes and wormholes, and also the fact that we shouldn't even use nouns because everything in the universe is a process, vibration and so on. And so when people came after lunch and when I brought my stuff from psychedelic sessions, it looked pretty down to earth as compared to what Fritjof was talking about. And I was talking about how you see things in certain non-ordinary states of consciousness, whereas he was talking about matter, that material world that we live in. The next chapter, big chapter for me, I should mention that we had these meetings, and then finally we had this discipline, and they finally changed the name transhumanistic to transpersonal, which was a name that I gave to a group of experiences that were transcendental experiences. I talked about the biographical level, the perinatal level, and then the transpersonal level, and both Abe and Tony Sutich liked that name, so they changed the transhumanistic into transpersonal. But then I was still in Baltimore, so the next chapter then was when I came to Esalen, where initially people were not very happy when I was talking about the research that we have done. They said, well, it's great to hear about these fantastic experiences, but can't we do something? Do you have a little stash on the side? Can't we have the experiences? I said, I don't have the license here for that, and I don't think Esalen would be very happy. And so I started thinking about, what could we do experientially? And I remember that in some of the sessions, the early sessions, when my patients felt unfinished, the drug was wearing off, and it was not a good closure of the experiences. A couple of them asked me to do some physical intervention. Like the first of those clients was coming down from the session. I was really mad, was angry, and had pain in the shoulder. And he says, I feel if I could get through this pain, I would feel better. Could you put some pressure there? So I put some pressure, and he says, not enough, more. My thumb was already breaking, and it was not enough. And finally, he started screaming and growling and coughing and shaking. And we did it for a while, maybe 20 minutes, and he was relaxed and he was in a great place. And the next time it was a female patient who was again coming down. It was terrible nausea. And so I came, and she says, I have really bad feelings here. And so, I would come like a doctor and would sort of poke there a little. And there was a projectile vomiting that just missed me, from a few inches. Two episodes of that. And she felt great. And so I saw that we can do things to get better integration of psychedelic sessions. So I started doing it routinely. And then it happened that in several patients, this body work triggered fast breathing, kind of what's called saccadic breathing. And then they told me that the faster breathing took them back into the session. The drug was already worn off. But the breathing suddenly brought them, they were like in the middle of the session again. So I saw that faster breathing can somehow bring material out of the unconscious to consciousness. And so we started playing with it, breathing, and we brought the music, which we were using in psychedelic sessions. And
what was the music like?
We had actually a music therapist who would sit down with the patients and ask about their tastes and interests. So if there were more sophisticated patients, we had a training for professionals using psychedelics. And they liked classical music, and quite a few also had certain sophistication in spiritual matters. So they wanted shamanic music or some kind of Hindu bhajans or kirtans or Kachak or something like that. But also we worked with alcoholics who had much simpler tastes. And so it was even things like Mahalia Jackson and things like that. So. The general idea was to bring in music that would support where people were. So let's say if it was very clearly that they're very angry, we would bring some drumming and some really intense music. And if they were, pelvic movements showing that there's something sexual, we would play Scheherazade or something. When it was, already at the end and it's coming to the closure, we would use some kind of timeless, floating, meditative music, ragas or something like that. But again, looking at the nature of the experience itself and the taste or the background of the patients. Yeah. Well, initially we were working such that the group was lying with the heads toward the center, and they were kind of holding hands, and we let them breathe faster, and we were playing the music. And then there was always somebody, sometimes more than one, close to the experience. And that is triggered really a process in them, and we would sort of stop, and then we do this work, the body work with these people. Sometimes we ended up with 3 people in process. Christina would work with one person, I would work with the other, and then some people in the group would be just taking care of the third person, and then when one of us was finished, we would just move. So sometimes it became like a chain. And then something amazing happened. We had this Buck Creek house, or there was probably a quarter of an acre or more of, it was like poison oak and birds and stuff. And we wanted to have a garden, so we created terraces and we were growing veggies there. And so I was working in the garden quite a bit. And at one point I was creating terraces, and I was lifting a beam, and I threw off my back to the point that I was in agony. We had a king-sized bed, and I was on one side, Christina on the other. And when she moved, it was like getting a dagger. And we had a group of 46 people, and as you know, people come here from Australia or Europe or South America. So we promised the breathwork, and so this, what are we going to do? I can't come close to somebody and do body work, It's just like, because it rattles you. You go with the process. And so what do we do? And then after a while we said, well, why don't we pair them up and just tell them what to do and just supervise it? And so we did that, and the session was such a success that we never did it differently. Not only now, most of the people in the half of the group, had, pretty significant experiences. But the sitters told us how much they got out of it, what a privilege it was to be there with another person, such intimate process and so on. And so this was suddenly a whole other new form of it that we just continue until today. And the groups, grew from the 36 that we had, the maximum that we could accommodate here, to we had 460 people in Moscow breathing.
How long were you here from 1973 on?
14 years.
You stayed 14 years?
14 years here,
Oh, incredible.
Now, we did like a lot of weekends, a lot of 5 days, and then every year there were two of those months-longs.
How do you think it changed the character of the Esalen culture for many people there to be doing the holotropic breathwork?
Well, it was the holotropic breathwork, but also the month-longs. People really loved that, and for me, it was an incredible blessing. I mean, I came from Johns Hopkins, seven years at the university, and we had every Wednesday we had a seminar when they invited like the stars of the, of the time, the cutting edge, what they thought was, which was mostly like a new antidepressant or some new tranquilizer. So it was boring as compared to what was happening here. This was really the cutting edge at that time. And I had this really privileged position where I could decide what the topic of the month-long, and then who were the people, whom I would like to spend some time and learn from. And everybody wanted to come to Esalen. Esalen, was a beautiful place, and so people were very, very excited to come here. And so we had 31 of these, actually 29, and 2 were 6 week workshops. You have in the Esalen office, you have the old catalogs, so you can see the lineups. I mean, the guest faculty, unbelievable. There was Joseph Campbell was in most of them, Houston Smith, Fritjof Capra, Rupert Sheldrake. There were a lot of yogis, shamans, Tibetan teachers and so on. Quite an amazing lineup. I don't think any university has that kind of a faculty,
Talk to me about some of the collaborations that you made. Who would you say was your closest or most frequent collaborator at Esalen?
Well, Gregory Bateson was here. He was diagnosed with a cancer that was a big tumor, they said, of the size of the grapefruit sitting on vena cava, and they gave him 4 weeks. And again, he met Michael, and Michael said, Gregory, if you're dying, why don't you come to Esalen? Esalen is a great place to die. So he came, and then everybody who had any healing sort of ambitions, descended on him. So there were anybody from, acupuncturists to Filipino psychic healers and so on. And he lived 2.5 years. So I had this great privilege to be in close contact, daily contact with Gregory Bateson, Dick Price was an incredible support. He was the visionary here, at the time. And he also had 3 episodes of what I would call spiritual emergency, but what was called psychotic episodes. Very fascinating. In one of them, he had a past life at the time of Alexander the Great, and he was recognizing the people there and telling the history there. And his parents were quite affluent. They took him to what was considered elite institution, which was the Institute of Living in New Haven. Yeah. And they gave him any number of shocks, electroshocks, insulin. Nobody thought that this was fascinating, what was happening. Studying it, they just, all they knew is to hit him over the head to get it out of him. And this happened twice, and then the third time he refused and he stayed here. He had a friend called Patrick, and he ended up in some log house here, and Patrick was bringing him food, and he just worked through it by himself. So then when we came up with the concept of spiritual emergency, and Christina started the Spiritual Emergence Network, Dick was an incredible supporter of that. He gave us a house and 4 scholars, and he's also supporting anything that was any innovation, anything exciting he wanted to have here at Esalen. That's really the primary thing was the vision, and it was a tragedy. He was after the great fire and then the rains. the mountains were loose, and he used to go meditate in the canyon, the Redwood Canyon, and he was sitting, and a boulder came down, which they estimated to be like 5 tons, and then exploded and hit him in the head, and so it killed him. And I think, an important part of Esalen died there. I mean, I really felt the absence of him. He was the spirit that was driving this, and it was an amazing funeral, kind of really tribal. Such an important figure.
Did you have connections with Gabriel Roth? Because I think about the trance-inducing aspect of the holotropic breathwork, and I feel like there's some similarity between.
We had her in the month-longs, and we had her in. I didn't get into that part yet. In the international transpersonal conferences, she was always there doing the five movements and stuff. But that was another situation that I just created this close friendship connection with all the major stars, the cutting edge, the consciousness research, new paradigm and stuff. Because we met here, in the big house, usually in a very informal situation, sitting on pillows and so on, quite different from the setting where these people presented their ideas normally, which was like an auditorium, an official thing, lectern and so on, where they had to be very careful what they say and protecting their image and so on. Whereas here we really got, their thinking in a pure form. Very informal. Then we all ended up naked in the bath, and we continued the discussions there, And so I developed a relationship when I started the International Transpersonal Association. I was in a position where I could pick up the telephone and choose any of those people and say, Carl, we're going to have a conference in International Transpersonal Conference in Bombay. We can't pay any honorarium, but we'll pay for the airplane ticket, and we'll put you up in the hotel and feed you. Would you come? And nobody ever turned down. Everybody coming without honorarium. I've never heard about anything like that, about other conferences. There was actually, when transpersonal psychology started, we initially initiated a group of us. It was Ken Godfrey, Walter Pankey, Helen Bonney, John Lilly, and those were meetings in Council Grove, several of them, and then became clear that we should have international conferences, and there was a couple from Iceland, Geir Williamson and his wife. So they created 2 international conferences in Iceland, and then the third one was in Inari in Lapland, in northern Finland, and then the fourth one was in Belo Horizonte, which was in Brazil. And at the end of this conference, he says, we're having these international meetings. Why don't we create an organization that would sort of be a container for it? And so everybody says, great, let's do it. And then, who's going to be the president? And then somebody said Stan Grof, and somebody seconded it. And I ended up, doing things that I was not really used to do, administration and stuff like that. But I decided, okay, I'm going to take it on. And I came here to Esalen, and then thinking about how do you start a non-profit organization, and then turned out that I needed 3 members for that, and I was alone. And I was asking people, and they had mixed feelings about it. And then I came to Michael Murphy and to Dick Price, and would you be the founding members of this? And they say, sure, we'll sign it. So on paper, they are the 2 of them are co-founders of this ITA.
Did your time at Esalen make an impact on you personally? Were there things about the land and the place that changed you?
Well, I just loved it. This was the most interesting time of my life, of course. And, I would not be professionally where I am now without all those connections and the input from those people. It was just, coming here, I was here. It was all sort of coming from all over the world. So it was an amazing gift for me. And, of course, the sacredness of that place. And, I had also a few sessions, which I don't usually talk about. So it's incredible, some experiences that I had here, it's with and without psychedelics, yeah. And you asked before how I think that the breathwork changed Esalen. I think the breathwork did, but also the month-longs. People just love the quality of the input that was here, we opened it to quite a few people in Esalen, so they participated in this, and if it was not full participation, because that was limited by the floor space for the breathwork, but we opened up the presentations, the lectures and stuff like that. Or in the Buddhist workshop that we did, we had a Korean swordsman, amazing, in front of the office there. We had the performance of this Korean swordsman, which was unbelievable. He was blindfolded and had a couple of students, disciples, and one of them sort of took off his shirt, was lying on the grass. They put a stool on each side, and they put a watermelon on each of them, and then watermelon on the belly of this guy. And he went like good 4 or 5 meters away, and he showed a samurai sword, which was one of those that cut hair, that takes like 3,000 heating and dipping in water and God knows what. And he showed also a solid bag, a black velvet bag. He put it over his head, and he was standing there like good 4 or 5 meters from him in this kind of position. And then at a certain point, he let out this warrior scream, and that all the dogs started barking. And then he kind of a somersault over one of his arms, holding this sword, ending up in above this guy. He chopped the melon on the right, on the left, and then on the belly of this guy, and it just fell apart. And there was like a napkin under it, and there was just a little indentation. Blindfolded, and so we had a discussion afterwards. People saying, how do you do that? Do you sort of memorize it? How it is? How do you do it? And he said, no, you just meditate until all is one, and there's no problem. The swordsman, the sword, the melon, the guy, it's just one. So anyway, so there were these kinds of presentations we always opened to Esalen. So there was an exciting, enthusiastic spirit when everybody was looking forward to the next one, what it's going to bring. In another one, we brought Luis Gasparetto, who's a spiritist psychologist from Palo Alto. And he goes into a trance, and he paints in the style of dead masters. And so we went to San Paulo, and we discovered him, and we were just planning a month-long, which was called Energy, Physical, Emotional, and Spiritual. And we said, this would be great, So we invited him, and he came, and on the way he stopped in Los Angeles with Thelma Moss, who was a parapsychologist, a friend of mine. And he did a performance there in her apartment, and all the lights on the block went out. And when the lights came back on, they found out that he continued painting, that he didn't need light, and so painted, paintings. And so we said, that's great, but we don't want him to paint in darkness. People wanted to see it. So we did, in the old Huxley, we did a red light, because you cannot distinguish colors with red light. And so he was sitting in the middle, and he wanted, this was the Seasons from Vivaldi played. This was inspiration for him. And he was in the middle at the table, and Christina was just handing him, big sheets of paper. And he was painting. Much of the time didn't look, was just looking up and just painting, sometimes painting, 2 paintings, one of each, with each hand. At one point he painted one upside down with his leg, just putting colors on his bed, like Monet, these kinds of things. So he ended up in an hour, we had 26 paintings here. For a long time they were hanging in different cabins at Esalen, And so those were the kind of performances. This Luis Gasparetto actually finished these 26 paintings and was still sitting there like it was not quite finished. And then said, there is a spirit here. He calls himself Fritz Perls. He wanted to be painted by Toulouse-Lautrec. And so he did that, got Fritz Perls, and then said sort of more, and then said, there's another spirit, this Ida Rolf. And she wants to be painted the way she looked like when she was 40. And she was probably 70 or something like that. And so he did that. And I remember Dick Price then corresponded with Germany, I don't know how long, trying to get a photograph what Ida Rolf looked like when she was 40.
I'm curious what it's like for you. It feels like there's a bit of a psychedelic renaissance going on right now as the therapeutic use of psychedelics hits the mainstream. What is it like for you and your legacy as this topic goes mainstream?
It's kind of sweet and sour, It's exciting that it's coming back, but it's also 40 years left where we could have been, And the other thing is not a lot of stuff that's happening that's new, except I think the Midhöfers, the MDMA treatment of PTSD. That's a new thing. The rest of it's interesting that it's happening, but it's a repetition of the old. With the cancer patients, we have done it 40 years ago. Actually, when we asked for more money, they said, "We have already proved that it's useful. It should go now to the hospital. There's no need to, research it any further." And of course, it didn't happen. And now it's going to take quite a while before it goes mainstream, if it goes ever mainstream. The MDMA, I think, has a chance because the PTSD is such a formidable problem, Yes. Mental health, economic, political problem, and nothing else is helping. So that has a chance.
And what about depression?
Depression is most types of depression are very, very flexible. They come frequently, periodically. They're not something that's like, infiltrating the whole system. We see sometimes people moving out of depression, longer depression, in a couple of holotropic breathwork sessions. And also it's quite responsive to psychedelic sessions. I feel that there is something that could be a psychedelic of the future, which is the methoxy DMT, which comes out of the toad, out of the parotid glands. That's you can have powerful healing and transformation happening within an hour, which is the time of one session of psychoanalysis. Where you wouldn't even start talking about your story, and you already would have really significant results. And it's kind of makes me angry that if you have such a problem like PTSD, that they are not somewhat experimental or adventurous. There's all that nonsense through the FDA, and this has been used by Indians, for centuries. If there was something really noxious, it would not have continued. I mean, so things like the mushrooms and the peyote and this methoxy DMT in the toad, this has been already to testing done. That there's no necessary for FDA to put millions of dollars into it. And also, the research that would interest me, the new research would be research of creativity. It's known that people got Nobel prizes, for discoveries that they claimed they did under LSD, including, Francis Crick, the DNA, and Kari Mullis, the polymerase chain. So I would like to see, people who are quantum relativistic physicists or biologists and even mathematicians, what they could do in those states. Willis Harman wrote a wonderful book which is called Higher Creativity, how many of the major breakthroughs in science, in mathematics, certainly music, art, were done in non-ordinary states of consciousness. And so that would be exciting, new research, that I would like to see. But unfortunately, there was a hierarchy when we were asking for permission to do research. The easiest was to get it for cancer patients. Yeah. because they would die anyway, so people didn't feel that they're taking chances, the administrators and so on. The most difficult was to get the permission to use it with psychologists and psychiatrists for training sessions, because then if something happens, that's a major problem. You don't have, serious medical reasons to do that, So again, creativity, study in creative people who don't have any medical condition that you would justify it with. It's going to be one that's very difficult to get permission for.
I guess I'll just close by asking, what lies in the future for you?
Well, I was invited by Shift Network, by Stephen Dinan, to do a series of modules for telecourse, which were eight weeks, and they got a lot of response. There were over 600 people, and so they put a lot of pressure on me to do an advanced one, and they wanted 24 additional ones to 8. Where I had to really go into all kinds of new areas to come up with a new program every week, And so I ended up with a lot of notes, and Brigitte was looking at it and listening to those telecourses, and she said, why don't you write it up? So I have now a contract with MAPS and also with a Swiss publisher to do 2 volumes, a kind of an encyclopedia of inner journeys. Everything that people should know if they do inner journeys or areas that would interest them, because it opens up certain areas of interest. So I'm now working on the 2nd volume. The first one is already written. The other thing I'm really very, very interested in to release the breathwork into the world.
What is the best way, if someone is super interested in trying out the holotropic breathwork, but they're a complete novice, what is the best way to get into it?
But there are a lot of people whom we trained who are offering it, several of them in the Bay Area, for example, but in other parts of them. So it would be depending on where they live, to look at the list of the facilitators, and there are people who offer workshops every month or so.
Stan Grof, thank you so much for being here, and I want to personally thank you. Your holotropic breathwork has given me some peak experiences, so I have great respect and great gratitude for the pioneering work that you've done.
Thank you for having me.
Today's show is produced in conjunction with Cheryl Franzel, Geraldine Hess, Lori Putnam, Shannon Hudson, and Ian Golden. Our music is by Nico Holloman. If you'd like to hear more episodes, please find us on iTunes, and if you like what you're hearing, take a second to rate us or write a review. You can also find our episodes at esalen.org. That's ESALEN.org. Until next time, be well.